All right, yeah. So,
Tell me.
someone told me they were at a dinner with General Mattis, and it's like one of those buffet things. All the different tables get up to go, and he got up and he went straight to the dessert table, and and got dessert. And someone said, "Oh, you're getting dessert first?" And he said, "Dessert is not guaranteed. Life is short." And I love that. The idea is like do the thing that you want to do while you're sure you can do it, because
Yeah.
you have no idea what the future holds.
Yeah. The caveat to that is if you live that way without discipline, then your destiny will be a little different than if you live that way with discipline.
No, that's true. There is this sense of memento mori from the Stoics that we have to live while we can. The future is uncertain. Seneca says, "Live immediately," but
Right.
also, how do you plan for a future that may happen? So I think
Yeah.
I kind of think about it. It's not that you will die tomorrow or next week or next year and live accordingly. It's that you could. So you have to balance both the moment now that's in front of you with the fact that uh, the the future could happen also, and if you have not invested in or been disciplined enough, that will be miserable.
That's right. And I think at the highest level, the mastery level, those two come together in an effortless choice. For instance, you can enjoy the dessert with great awareness and have it still be a practice that supports your long term evolution and growth. And with great awareness, you probably would eat just a very small fraction of that dessert that, other than, or in, how do I say this? As opposed to eating with unawareness, because you're just enjoying it for the hedonistic, pleasure of it, or you're eating because of you want to be distracted from something else that's causing you suffering in your life, right? So
No, I
these
think
two things, at the highest level come together. You don't need to sacrifice in order to have great discipline, in my
no, I think
opinion.
that's right, and we forget that temperance, the virtue from which self discipline is derived, another way to say that is moderation,
Right.
right? So you're not putting off the dessert because you don't deserve it. You think life should be without pleasure. You're just saying, I'm going to have it now while I still can, but I'm not going to eat so much that this pleasure becomes uh,
An obstacle.
uh, an obstacle. Yeah, I mean, you think about this with like drinking is such a good example. I don't happen to drink, but if you drink so much tonight that you have a hangover tomorrow and you're miserable the first several hours of the next day,
Right.
was it really a pleasurable experience? Right? You had pleasure at one moment, but that same pleasure was causing regret and pain in another moment. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the idea when we think about temperance or when we think about uh, living now and living later, it's can you make a decision now that brings you joy and pleasure without the expense or costs
Right.
of doing it later? If it, let's say a more common example would be like work. You're working really hard, you're invested, you're building your business, etc. But by the time you get that success, if you've driven your spouse away, if you don't have a relationship with your parent or with
Right.
your children, you don't have any friends, you don't have any hobbies,
Right.
your health is deteriorated. How successful are you really? Because you have traded other valuable things to get this other valuable thing.
Right. And there's a fine line here too, Ryan, because especially when we're beginning something new, whether it be a relationship or a book project or a business, oftentimes you have to sacrifice the short-term balance and
Sure.
pleasure for, to get the inertia broken, to get the spaceship through the atmosphere, so to speak, metaphorically. And so you can feel like you're out of balance, but the reality is you can you rebalance that as the thing kind of gets up to speed and you're in between book deals. And if you've done this a number of times, you take time to recover, you go back into creativity mode, and it swings in the other direction. So we swing between creativity and action and creativity and action. And sometimes it feels like we're doing too much action, but it's because it's necessary.
Yeah, a friend of mine was saying that early in your career, you have to say yes to everything to
Right.
hopefully get to a point where you can say no to basically
So the
everything.
main things, right, that,
Yeah,
that
and
distract you,
and
right?
and
That's
I think what we're talking about, some people might say, "Oh, is this a contradiction?" No, it's a
it's a
balance,
balance.
right? It's there's a tension, and these things, the two different poles keep it in tension, and that if you can't, if you if if you need it to be certain, if you need it to be clear, you're probably not at that master level, as you said. It's
Right.
that tension, that balance is key, and you figure out as you go what the balance is. In different times, the balance is different, but
Right.
it's, I think Eastern philosophy is more comfortable with paradoxes
That's right.
and seeming
Because
contradictions,
it doesn't
where
work.
Western
It doesn't
philosophy
work in
wants
a
a specific thing.
right. Because Westerners believe in the linear cause and effect reality, and the Western or the Eastern mind is more a holographic or, simultaneity, and which allows for synchronicity and possibility. The other thing that's really interesting about this conversation is, I think um, it's a fantasy to think that there actually is such a thing as balance. I think
Hmm.
there is always a fluctuation, and you said the more competent you get at you know challenging the notion that it's all effort or it's all play, right? It's all hedonism or it's all sacrifice. You get more and more competent at balancing. And a metaphor I'll use is like a teeter totter, right? A teeter totter is never ever actually in perfect balance over the center point, but the
Sure.
but the more adept the kids get, they can, the arcs go smaller and smaller until it appears as if they're balancing. But in reality, there's a million little adjustments that are going on. And that's similar to how we want to live our lives, is like we want to get more and more skilled at, at this kind of juxtaposition, this flow between action and effort and recovery and creativity until it appears as if there's balance, but there's always a little bit of dynamic tension between those two. And that
Yeah,
tension's
I think that's,
important because it creates a little bit of resistance, which creates us moving forward as opposed to collapsing back into inertia.
yeah, the Stoics have talked about, Marcus Aurelius talks about this idea of there's like the rhythm of the universe, or whatever, sort of metaphor you want to use, but that we're sort of like coming back, like the idea that there's this rhythm. So balance, you're right, is tricky because you're never going to get exactly there. But the idea that there's like a beat, that there's music going on, and you can come away from it and come back to it.
Yeah,
But the idea that like you're trying to stay on the beat as much as possible, but because you're a human being, you're never perfectly going to be in sync with the music, but you can catch yourself. Oh, I've come off of it. Now I've got to come back to it. I like that idea.
yeah,
I like the idea of trying to approach balance. But if you think that the balance exists, or worse, this is what people do. They think that once they have gotten balance,
yeah,
they can then keep it there,
right,
right? That you can, it's something you do one time, as something you're continuously doing and adjusting for. That's also wrong.
right. I agree with that because that's just similar to saying, I've made it and now I can kind of relax, which then spins you back into that inertia where then you're going to have to overcompensate with action again to get out of that.
That's right.
Your metaphor around music is fascinating because the more competent a both a musician and a composer gets, the more they appreciate the silence between the notes. And the
Hmm.
more often I imagine that they're making their music from that silence as opposed to from, this is the sound I want to make. I'm just making
That's
that
right.
up, but I really believe that's probably true. And just like a poet, the better poets have fewer words and they appreciate the space that it takes to settle into the words as opposed to just throwing more words at the reader.
That makes sense. And I would also say, when I think about music, I think about early on when you are playing music, you're very conscious of all that you're trying to do. This is the beat, this is the key, this is what this person's doing, this is what I'm going to do. But as you get better and better, the the whole process becomes much more intuitive, much more natural, much less conscious, and it just becomes something you're just simply doing. You're existing fully in it. The flow state is naturally there.
Right.
So, early on, like when you're talking to a writer, they're like, this is how many hours I do, this is the way that
That's
I
right.
do,
Tight
it's very
structure.
rigid.
Right.
Yeah, but as you get better at it, it's not that you become less strict with yourself, but it becomes more amorphous. You know, you're just kind of flowing with it, and you go in and out of it, um, and you're operating just on a deeper, more intuitive level, whether it's balance or work life balance, or just all of it is just coming from a deeper, more
That's right.
masterful place.
That's fascinating. Yesterday, someone was interviewing me and they asked me, said, in between stuff, right? In between your writing, your podcasting, your business meetings, and this and that and the other thing, what does your mind do? Like, what do you think about?
Mm,
And I paused for a moment. And I said, well, I think about what I decide to think about in those moments. And I was trying
sure.
to make the point that at the level of, at least where I'm at, I don't know if you want to call that mastery or not, but some might. My mind just doesn't fill up with whatever just because I'm in between the things that I decide to do, right? I literally have an opportunity every moment to decide what's next. And in the white space, oftentimes that is nothing, right? Or just listen to a great audiobook, or allow for, some recovery and, spontaneity, which is very different than the answer I would have given 15 years ago. Would have been like, well, I would have, what's next is what's next on my task list, or, you know what I mean? Or
Right.
I've got to fill that time up with learning, or, right, I've got to get my 20 minutes or a half hour or hour of reading in, or, you know what I mean? I would have checked off the things I'm supposed to do to optimize myself as a human being, which is all doing as opposed to,
Yeah, I think as you become more confident in yourself and what you do, it turns down the volume on
right,
noise, but it also turns down that little engine inside of you that's needing to constantly do and
to
do and
perfect
do.
itself.
That's
Right,
also, yeah, that's also very insecure.
right.
So you're just kind of like, well, what are you doing next? I'm doing this, whatever I want. I'm doing me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're just sort
Mm-hmm.
of confident just being in whatever you're in, doing whatever you're doing. There's not this franticness. Like I feel like as I've gotten older and as I've gotten more successful, I like to think that it's not that I'm less intense, but I am less
More
frantic,
relaxed, which is
and
not
that,
the opposite of less
yes,
intense. It's a different quality altogether.
that's right. Like if you walked into a jujitsu gym, the highest ranked person would be the
That's
friendliest,
right.
the
Right.
calmest, the most
That's right.
welcoming, the most insecure, because they know they can take anyone in the room, and they know that they don't need to take anyone in the
Right.
room, and they're just comfortable with who they are and what they can do.
Right. So I totally agree with that, and reminds me of Nakamura, my meditation and karate instructor that got me kind of down this whole path. I'm in the Zen path. Like, he was one of the most intense individuals I have ever seen in my life, or will ever see in my life. And people say that about me, but just what you described, he was also the most playful and relaxed, right? So this idea of being coiled, like a spring really tightly, so you can explode in an explosive, violent action if necessary. But within that coil, it gives you the freedom to operate, right? Because that coil is locked in tight. It's not going to spring at the slightest
Yeah.
trigger. It's not going to go off in the wrong person for the wrong situation. It's been trained and honed and refined through 40, 50 years so that it's completely in control. The trigger point is in control, and it's never released
Yes.
unless absolutely necessary.
Stephen Pressfield. Stephen Pressfield was just downstairs.
Oh,
I was recording a
Steve's
podcast
great.
with him this
Tell
morning,
him I
and
say hi if you see him.
he's
I love him.
he's the goat.
Mhm.
He's just so good. But he has a scene in his book, The Virtues of
Mhm.
War, which is about a young Alexander the
Great book.
Great,
Yeah.
which I think he based this story on Diogenes, who Alexander the Great and Diogenes, the philosopher and the conqueror, sort of have a number of really interesting interactions with each other. But uh, Pressfield has a fictional account in the book. Uh, and basically, Alexander the Great comes across this philosopher, and he just says, "Get out of my way." And the philosopher says, "No, I'm not going to do that," or something. And then Alexander the Great says, like, I'm the most powerful conqueror in the world. Who are you? And the philosopher looks at him and he says, I have conquered the need to conquer the
Right.
world.
I remember that.
Right. And he's gotten, so obviously, to get totally to a Zen place where you don't feel like anything matters. I'm not sure that's exactly what we're talking about, but this idea of where you've gotten to a place where you're like, I am good. I've done what I have done. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I don't need to do anything that I don't want to do. It allows you to operate on that plane, I think, of stillness and calmness and security that paradoxically allows you to do whatever it is that you do so much better.
That's ironic that you talk about this perspective that the Zen master gets to the state where he doesn't feel like anything matters. And that's actually not accurate. He gets to the state where he realizes that everything matters. Because everything, absolutely everything is interconnected and everything comes together to create this moment. Again, this is the Eastern reality, and it starts out as philosophy, then it becomes reality through the experiential aspect of the practice. And this is back to Stoicism. Stoicism as a philosophy is a dead art. Stoicism as a practice brings the philosophy alive. Zen as a philosophy, where you just study in a satsang or and you're not doing the daily practice, is just words. It's just dogma. But when you practice and you have the lived experience and you recognize that the fabric of humanity, a fabric of this life is this infinite interconnectedness, then you recognize that everything matters, including this moment between the emperor and the philosopher, because it's important for the emperor's enlightenment or his path. It's very, very different than the view of the Zen monk hiding from the world in a monastery and thinking that nothing matters, right?
Well, it's funny. I'm just thinking about this. I wrote it down. I want to write about this because it's really interesting. I think I've often been skeptical of the Zen sort of tradition of like, yes, retreat to a monastery, exit the world, give up all your material possessions, give up relationships, give up material success, etc. As contrasting that with Stoicism, which I've always loved. The Stoic Marcus Aurelius is the emperor, Seneca's a writer, Cato's a soldier. I've always loved that. But Western philosophy did the exact same thing. Instead of retreating to the monastery, the philosophers retreated to the academy. They exist in academic life. They've removed it from the practice of day-to-day existence and turned it into a theoretical exercise, when really it's Musashi, the samurai warrior,
I was just going to
studying
give you that
Zen,
example. That's right.
And Marcus Aurelius studying it to be emperor. That's what philosophy is to me, whether it's East or
the
West.
benevolent leaders
it's
of ancient India, right? Who ruled these vast civilizations as a benevolent leader, who were practitioner, scholar leaders, right? They were integrated. They were whole. The Stoics were pointing to that.
Totally.
The real juice is in not hiding from the world. Although, at the same time, there are certain people where that's their path, so to speak, right? So it's not like it's wrong for them, but it's not right for everybody. And it's also a mistake to think that that's Zen or that's, or Stoicism is this way. It's really it's the Stoics and the Zen masters of the past were pointing to this need to go back to what we were talking about earlier, to find that center point between action and inaction. And there's this saying in the martial arts, you find the inaction in action and you find the action in inaction. And this is like the yin yang symbol, right? Sometimes you just see it with a black and white, and it's kind of like a merge. And if you were to stretch those apart, it looks like an infinity loop. So you collapse it back together, you get the yin yang. And that was kind of an insight I had. I've never seen that written anywhere. But oftentimes you also see a white dot in the black region and a black dot in the white region.
Yeah.
That represents the contrast we're talking about. You're looking for the yin in the yang and the yang in the yin. And so that is what we mean by living Zen in everyday life, or being a what the yogis would call a householder. It was considered the highest path, to be able to practice yoga to attain enlightenment as a husband, father, wife, son, mother, business person, lawyer, academic. You know what I mean? And so that's the
Yes.
path that I've been teaching. And I believe that's the path that the Stoics were talking about, because again, Marcus Aurelius makes it very clear that Stoicism isn't just about thinking about these ideals. It's about getting out, getting your hands dirty and your heart dirty, and like figuring out, like in real life, experientially, proving it as a study of n equals one. And that's the experiential nature of Stoicism that is so beautiful, that I think that you make a big attempt to bring that alive in your writing, starting with the obstacles away, because that was eye-opening for a lot of people. It's like, wait a minute, Mark's been saying failure is not an option. What does he mean by that? Now Ryan comes out and says the obstacle is the way, right? It's actually, it's not even an obstacle. It's a blessing, because it's going to be where you find your greatest learning and your lessons in life. So embrace the suck of those, learn how to navigate them. That's called resilience, with joy and bliss and learning. And then guess what? The obstacles appear to diminish in your life because you become more and more adept at overcoming them.
Yeah, I mean, if you learn from it, if you become better for it, if you take something away from it that
Right.
improves you, it
Well, it's
wasn't a
not a failure.
failure.
Right.
But if you decide that it was a failure, an unalloyed, pure, complete
Right.
failure, then it was, right? And so when you're saying that failure is not an option, and when I'm saying the obstacle is the way, we are in fact
That's right.
saying the
Yeah.
same thing, which is that you have to choose to see this as a way to move forward, even if it's a situation you didn't want
That's
to
right.
be in, and no one reasonably would choose
Yeah.
to be in. But you
Well,
still
that's why
decide.
this
I
is
think Hemingway said
unreasonable.
something.
Stoicism and Zen and Navy SEAL training are unreasonable, but they're necessary if you want to perfect yourself or have a kind of life of freedom. And I'm going to invoke Jocko, but discipline equals freedom. I was thinking about that when I thought about the title of your book. That was his saying, like trademark Jocko: discipline equals freedom. Discipline equals destiny. Destiny should be freedom, right?
Yes, of
Otherwise,
course.
you're not whole. You're not, if you don't have total autonomy over your mind and your movements and your finances and your relationships, then in some way you're under the control or spell, or even if it's just childhood trauma, you're under the spell of your parents' trauma, right? And you haven't freed yourself from that. And freedom, ultimate
Well,
freedom, is
and
a difficult thing to attain. It takes practice.
Jocko's totally right that discipline is freedom. There's a great Eisenhower quote. He says freedom is really the opportunity for self discipline,
Yes, I love
right?
that.
Which I love. And I'm doing this series now on the cardinal virtues, so courage, temperance, justice, wisdom. So as I sat down to write about temperance or self discipline, I wanted to think about what I had to say on the topic. And while I would totally agree that discipline creates a kind of freedom, and that someone who has no discipline is not only not free, they are a slave, right? Because you're a slave to your impulses, to your urges, to what other people do. I'm trying to make a slightly bigger argument, which is that discipline will determine who
Correct.
you are, right? It determines whether you're free or not, whether you're great or not, whether you're decent or
Right.
not, right? Whether you're in control of your emotions or your emotions are in control of you. When we say that discipline is destiny, it's in the sense that they used to say that character
Right.
is fate, that your character determines who you are, what you're
And
going to be
discipline
able to
determines
do.
character.
I would say yes. And so not only does the discipline determine your destiny, but it can make whatever it is that you end up doing great
Right.
or not great, right? Like try to pick someone you admire who's not disciplined in some way. At the end of the day, discipline is the thing that sort of separates the
Yeah.
pros from the amateurs, the greats from the
Right. But I
not so
think
greats. So I agree discipline is definitely freedom. I just it's
it's
also
more than
even
that.
more than
And
that.
it's also important that we expand the concept for people what discipline means, because most people automatically think it has to do with either hard physical work or hard work in general, often to an
Yeah.
extreme, like a Navy SEAL training, right? Or the discipline of the stick, right? But to me, like when I
Yes.
break that word down, it means, its root word is disciple. It means to be a disciple to something bigger than yourself or to some future vision, right, of what's possible for your life or for humanity. And like, so this is like, we as a country lack discipline largely because we lack a vision for our future. So we really don't know what we're working toward. So it's very hard to mobilize efforts if you
Yes.
don't know what you're working toward. We've got some past concepts that people are fighting retrospectively for, but we don't have a common vision for the future. And I think that's one of humanity's biggest angst right now. So discipline, being a disciple to, hey, we are kind of all in this same spaceship Earth together. So wouldn't it make sense to create a collective vision for where we're going? And then create some disciplines around making sure that we can get there and don't like blow ourselves up or destroy ourselves in the process, right? Now I went really broad with
Yeah.
that, but discipline to me is to be a disciple to something bigger than your ego, to be something bigger. Like in this case, the ego is the enemy because the ego will always contract, right, to the simple or the lowest or the easiest path, and discipline requires us to move beyond that and take the harder route of determining what's better, for the higher good, either our higher good or your sense of God, right? Because that many people say, I'll be a discipline or disciple to God or my sense of a universal power, and that's absolutely fine as well, right?
Well, I think if you think about where you're trying to go or who you want to be, it makes discipline easier. So Seneca says, if you don't know what port you're sailing to, no wind
Right,
is favorable,
right,
right? If you don't know who you want to be or what kind of country you're trying to make or what kind of business you're trying to build, or if you don't know what you're trying to end up as, it makes it extraordinarily hard to make these individual decisions, right? Do I eat the cake or not eat the cake?
right,
Do I show up and work today or not? Do I give my best or not? Right? Am I kind or not? If you don't know what your code is, what the ideal, the standard, what you're a disciple of, and you're right, that's where the word discipline comes from. If you don't know what you're a disciple of, how can you know what to do
right,
in these individual micro decisions? But when you have that clarity, then it makes it much easier and
right,
much simpler and more black and white about what to do and what not to do.
right. Will invoke Simon Seneca here. The reason his work, It All Starts With Why, was so powerful, is so powerful, continues to be, and is so radically simple that when you listen to him, his TED talk or read his book, you're like, duh, how come I didn't
Yes.
think about this, right?
Right.
It's because the discipline to know your why is actually the highest discipline. It's the hardest. It's the most
Yes.
challenging. And it should all start there, right? And that's why the inner work of the Stoic or the inner work, of the Zen master or the yogi was the most important because that's where the why is found. Right? It's not found
I have
through more action by creating more businesses, by writing more books, unless you have a deep internal practice as part of those external initiatives, those outer initiatives.
I have a chapter in the book that was inspired by the GM of the Los Angeles Rams, Les Snead, who I've gotten to know. I went and saw them a couple of years ago, and he said, he's like, our main he said, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing,
That's right. I've
right? Like, sort of, what is
heard
your
that.
core value, your core mission? So when we think about discipline, it's not even like, hey, this is what I have to do to be who I want to be, but also here's all the things that I can't do, right? That I have to say no to, that I have to ignore, that I have to tune out, right? So you're the disciple of X. Well, there's going to be all this other stuff that you like or that distracts you or that you have opportunities to do. And so when Simon Sinek says you start with why, that's obviously a huge part of the discipline,
Right.
the strength and clarity and focus to sit down and go, why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish, etc. But then there's the day-to-day discipline of sticking with that why,
Right.
not getting distracted with all the other things you could do or that other people want you to do or that are also happening. I was reading, not to get too political, but I was reading a post, an article a few months ago about the ACLU,
Mm-hmm.
which started as an organization designed to defend free speech,
Right.
right? and
Where have they been the last
typically,
couple of years?
right, particularly unpopular free speech. But the problem is, as an organization, they've got distracted by all these other political causes.
Right.
And that sometimes those causes are not only not related to protecting free speech, but might have contradictory values, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of what is the main thing, like what do I do, what can only I do, this requires an immense amount of discipline, because people are going to say, well, why aren't you being involved in this? Why aren't you doing this? What about this? What about this? There's an infinite number of things that can consume your time in the world. If you don't have the discipline to go like, I agree, all those things are important, but my main thing is protecting this.
I love that.
And that's what I'm going to do to the best of my ability.
Wow. What just came to me is, that was the original why for this country, not to, stay on the political, and I don't want to go down the political rabbit hole, but it was freedom. People came to America because they wanted freedom. People, the founding fathers, so to speak, created the Constitution, not the Constitution, but, the founding documents.
Yes.
Built upon this idea of freedom. And so it'd be nice to go back and remember that and reinvoke that why. Anyway.
It is. It's tricky though, right?
It
Because
is, yeah.
freedom,
it means different things to different people, maybe. Yeah.
Well, yes, but this is an interesting thing that the founders talk about, and I talk about this in at the end of the book. Just because you can't, like, I agree. The founders said, "Hey, we're not going to legally mandate you do this or that," right? But they were almost all the founders said something to the equivalent of, "This system will not work without virtue in the people." Right. Basically,
Right.
you can say whatever you want, but there's a lot of things that you should not say because it's rude, because it's wrong,
Right.
because it hurts people, because it's stupid, right? Like so free speech is a good example. Just because I can walk down the street insulting everyone I meet doesn't mean that I should. Right. And so when we think, oftentimes people talk a lot about freedom, which is important. But to me, discipline is also about obligation. It's also about a set of standards that you set for yourself that says, I don't care what's allowed. Here's what's acceptable per my code and my duties as a human being. So I wrote a piece a couple months ago about the Statue of Liberty. Viktor Frankl famously suggested on the West Coast, there'd be a statue of responsibility to counterbalance the Statue of Liberty. And to me, that's the that when we think about these virtues, also they're in a tension with each other.
That's the yin and the yang, because liberty is truly ultimately found within. So that's the yin, and responsibility is found through disciplined action and habituation and virtue building. That's the external. And, just to kind of put a pin into this, it seems obvious now to me, although I've never thought about this, that as the size and complexity of government has grown, individuals have outsourced or conveyed their what used to be personal virtues or virtues they got through the church or through a strong family unit or through reading, writing, and arithmetic. They've kind of like outsourced those to the government and abdicated the need to personally develop those skills because, the government was going to bring those to culture. And now that it's not, or it's doing it in a way that maybe, kind of is disruptive for certain mindsets, then it's brought some confusion, right? So now government, doesn't really actually know how to bring those virtues to the public. It's an interesting situation. At any rate, let's talk about Ryan for a moment.
Okay.
How did you become so fascinated about Stoicism? Because now, I could give you literally the mantle. If I were to give a Pulitzer Prize today, I'd say it's the man who brought Stoicism alive to a Western culture. So thank you very much.
Oh, that
we all
means
have
a lot to me.
Yeah, it's amazing. But why?
I got introduced to it when I was in college. But it was so different than what I was learning about in college. Again, that's sort of what we're talking about. It's like, oh, this is philosophy, but it's not abstract ideas. It's a code for the individual to live by.
Right.
And that just hit me so hard because it's not something we really talk about. I mean, if you're not a religious person, right? Like if you're not a religious person, where do you get a code to live by? I mean, maybe you
Mhm.
join the military, maybe you're drafted by the
Who
New
were
England
heavily
Patriots.
influenced by Aristotelian virtue ethics, by the way. It's taught
Yes.
in the academies, right?
But it's like if you're not part of an organization that has that code,
Yeah.
you're
Where do you
kind of
find it?
SOL, right? And so I think what I've loved about Stoicism and what gets me so excited about teaching it is that you have thousands of years of tradition of people just like you and I that were struggling to be their best self, sort of thinking through how to live, how to be happy, how to not be a slave to things, how to deal with adversity. And I just love the idea that philosophy can be practical and usable in real life.
Right. I love that too. So, at what point did you decide that this was the main thing for you, and you decided to keep the main thing the main thing?
I struggled with that. I was just
Mhm.
talking to someone about this. I realized that. So I had a career in marketing. I worked at American Apparel for a long time. I
Right.
worked with a number of authors.
You wrote a student book, didn't you? On like how to. What was your early work? Some of your earliest
Oh
work.
no, that's Cal Newport. Cal
Oh,
Newport
that
wrote
was
a book
Cal.
about
Okay. Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
be like a
Sorry.
great student. No, but
Yeah.
I wrote my first book was called Trust Me, I'm Lying, and it was an expose of the marketing and media system.
Okay.
And
That's what I was
so
thinking.
I did my first three books while I had a full time job in the sort of corporate marketing world, and I think I struggled with keeping it the main thing. I don't know if I was afraid of it. I don't know if I just had more energy that I knew what to do with, but it took me a while. I do think part of me was and remains a little worried about just being a writer because I worry this sounds weird. I worry that that's not real. That's not a real life, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm somewhat suspicious of people who only talk about things for a living, right? And so the businesses that I've done, the thing like I try to live a life that challenges me in ways that fuel the writing and the philosophy.
Yeah.
So I'm confident I'm not bullshitting people as some kind of
Yeah.
guru.
You
Does
have
that
to
make
have the
sense?
authenticity of experience. But also, I would challenge that. I don't think, I mean, there might be people who are just writers, but you're certainly not just a writer. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We're communicating through a digital media platform. So you are a communicator, you're a thought leader, you're a philosopher, you are a business leader. I mean, look at what you've created, or you and your partners have created with the Daily Stoic. I mean, that's extraordinary. Started out with a book that became a kind of a movement, right? And by the way, if you're listening and you haven't signed up for the Daily Stoic emails, go to dailystoic.com. It's brilliant. So
Oh,
you're
thank
way
you.
more than an author.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, I don't just want to be talking about this stuff. I also want to have opportunities in my life
To
where
do
I'm
stuff.
forced. I mean, we all are, as you said, we're all householders. So having kids challenges you to be stoic.
Hmm.
Being in traffic challenges you to be stoic, right? Doing your taxes challenges you to be stoic. But I wanted to have other things that I do. I like what I loved about the Stoics and what I love about the Stoics is that they're all multi-hyphenates, right?
Right. Yeah.
Seneca was a playwright, he was a senator, he was the advisor to the emperor, and he was a philosopher.
Right.
And I don't think he would have been as good at any of those things had he dropped one of those things,
Right.
right? It's the whole package. So
It's the
I've
package.
always just tried to do other stuff for that reason. And I think that's why I stayed in marketing longer than maybe I needed to because I liked it not being my full-time thing, but I think there was also a part of me that was held back by that.
Right. I think the bigger theme here that you're talking about is to not necessarily identify yourself with any particular role, to have an
Yes.
identity that is much bigger, more expansive. That could be your calling, right, in life, or the idea, the Eastern idea of dharma, right, your calling. And so you have a calling, and it's not wrapped up in an identity of being an author or a business person or even a Stoic philosopher or this or that. I mean, Ryan Holiday has a much bigger why. And then so the discipline equals destiny piece is for you to be true to that why every day and to make decisions disciplined decisions that are going to allow you to align with that and to bring that to life in a variety of different roles, to include being a father and a husband and et cetera, right? Because those are just as important as being an author and inspiring millions of people.
I totally. And in some ways, those are the most challenging things of all, right?
Right.
I heard a Zen expression where it's like, oh, you think you're Zen, go spend a week with your family. Uh,
I just did, by the
it
way.
challenges
My
in so
family of
ways.
origin totally destroyed my Zen, appearance. And I was like, oh my God, it doesn't take long when you head back to spend some time with the rents.
It sure does not. And you realize, man, there are no two people on the planet uniquely suited to push all of your buttons.
True that. That's awesome. So, zeroing in on this new book,
Yeah.
do you have like a few practices or principles that are like must-have takeaways that are maybe appropriate for a listener who's driving their car right now, or is going to give it the attention of a podcast?
Well, I sort of break the book up into a couple different kinds of disciplines. So there's obviously the physical discipline, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think anyone listening to this probably already has some kind of physical practice.
Probably,
But
yeah.
I do feel like the physical practice is a great metaphor, a great training ground for the other
Agree. It's a
practices,
great
right?
place to start because it can draw you toward the mental disciplines and then toward the deeper internal ones. Agree.
And like, I'll give you an example. It's not just like, hey, I got to work out because that's what discipline is about. Like, I'm working on this book now and it's a little like all over the place. When I look at my desk, like if I could pick this camera up and show you my desk, like my desk is a mess. And so as I was sitting down, I made a note to myself. I was like, before I get back to the book, after I finish this, I'm going to clean up this desk
Right.
because this mess is contributing to the intellectual
Confusion. Yeah.
mess. And
Totally.
so this is why in the military they make you shine your shoes and
Right.
tuck in your uniform. It's about the presentation. I think about this like as a writer, I work from home, I can do whatever I want, but I shower and shave every day before I write. I don't write in my pajamas, sitting on the couch. I get up, I get dressed, I go to work. No one asked me to do this thing, but it's part of the ritual. It's
Mm-hmm.
part of the discipline
Mm-hmm.
that allows me to take what I do seriously, or to use Stephen Pressfield's thing, as a pro,
That's
right?
right.
A pro shows up dressed for work.
Right. I love that. And, I've often said that your outer environment is a reflection of your inner. So if everything's cluttered outside of you, then it's likely you have a cluttered internal life. And you can reverse engineer that by decluttering your external, which will then lead to more peace of mind or clarity in the internal. And then that becomes a
Yes.
little bit of a discipline, right? So anytime you feel a little bit cluttered inside, you probably look around you and you see your desk is a mess or your closets, shoes are spilling out. So reverse
Well,
engineer your way back into clarity.
no, I think that's totally right. And then the next discipline would be like your temperament, right? So,
Nice.
as a young man, George Washington saw a play. The play was called Cato by Joseph Addison, and it's sort of the Hamilton of its day. Ironically, it was a huge play, like the biggest thing in the world. And in fact, in the American Revolution, a lot of the famous lines like "Give me liberty and give me death," or "I regret I have but one life to lose for my country," these are lines from that
No
play.
kidding.
Everyone would have gotten that they were references from that play.
That's awesome.
But Washington's favorite line from that play is to look at everything in the cool light of mild philosophy.
Hmm.
Right. So when we think of discipline, we think of someone who's strong, who works hard. But I also think the discipline of someone who doesn't lose their temper, who's difficult to provoke, who's calm,
Mm-hmm.
grace under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we think of discipline, it's that coolness in the moment that that's not just happening.
Mm-hmm.
They've got them like one of the sculptors of Washington spends like 7 or 8 days just studying the man in person, and he realized that Washington had like quite a temper and was a very passionate man, but that Washington kept all this on a leash. It wasn't that he was just naturally calm and naturally stoic. It was that he worked at it. It was a discipline for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to apply that standard to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get provoked. It takes discipline to say, I'm not going to let that get to me.
Right. I love that. I mean, that's kind of mindfulness in action, right? It's creating that
Yes.
separation so that you don't react, but you can respond with discipline. So
Yes.
that's a discipline in and of itself, that practice.
I tell the story in the book about Sam Cassell, the basketball player. He's playing for the Timberwolves, and he hits this shot. I think it's in Game 6. It might have been in Game 7. He hits this like corner three. It's an incredible shot, and as he's running back on defense, he does what they call the big ball dance or
Mm-hmm.
the big balls dance. He acts like he's having to cradle his enormous testicles.
Oh my God.
Right? Like as he's running back, it's this like, it's a touchdown dance.
Yeah,
That's what he's
exactly. It's
doing.
like spiking the football and doing a dance. Yeah,
Yes.
that's not discipline.
Well, as he does this, he fractures his hip.
Oh my God.
Right. And they go to the NBA finals next and lose.
Oh, wow.
It costs, and he's a non-factor. He plays 2 of the games, basically takes himself out of a championship, costs his team the championship because of one moment of a lack of discipline, right? That one celebration, that one bout of enthusiasm that wasn't necessary, that didn't do anything. It was a devastating, career-altering injury.
Wow.
And so when we think about temperament and self-control, it's not just the control to show up and work or to run an extra mile. It's, to keep those emotions in check because they very rarely lead to a good place.
Do you think temperance and humility are the same thing? Because the way you describe it sounds like
I think they're related. Yeah. I mean, I think they're very related. I mean, ego is a form of intemperance, right? Ego is excess. Like confidence to me is also temperance, though, right? Confidence is, this is what I've earned. This is the right amount. Too little is a problem, and too much is a problem. But you got to have the right amount. And to me, the right amount is the amount you've earned.
You've earned it, but also you are aware of what the right amount is through trial and error.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fascinating. I love it.
And then I think there is a kind of level of self-discipline above just regular self-discipline, that kind of heroic self-discipline. And so I kind of wrap the book up. I'm talking about Marcus Aurelius. Like we have this expression, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And here you have Marcus Aurelius. He's given absolute power. And the first thing he does is he makes his stepbrother co-emperor, right? Like he shares absolute power. Again, to go to Washington, Washington repeatedly relinquishes his power, right? He resigns his commission. He resigns. He doesn't seek a third term as presidency, setting an extra constitutional norm that stands for 200 years. Washington was all about that kind of heroic self-sacrifice. That there's normal discipline, and then there's that heroic discipline. Shackleton is heroic self-discipline, right? Like where it shouldn't even be humanly possible to pull off what you just pulled off.
Abraham Lincoln, right? Stacking his cabinet with his enemies is a good example of that as well.
Yeah, you think about how provoking and obnoxious and unpleasant that would have been. And he not only dealt with it, he chose it for himself, right? If he had inherited the cabinet, you're like, oh, that must have taken a lot of self-discipline. But he knew what that was going to be like, and he chose it.
Because he was a disciple to something bigger than himself. He did it because he knew it was in the best interest of the country. Wouldn't that be nice if our politicians today did what was actually in the best interest of the country?
I'm almost upset that you brought that example up, because that would have been the perfect thing to include in part 3 of the book, and I didn't. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
That's awesome. So what's next? You've now tackled 2 of the 4 virtues.
Yes. I'm even writing this down.
You're going to have to squeeze that in there somewhere.
I'm going to have to write something about it. Yeah. So I'm doing 4 of the cardinal virtues is this series that I'm doing. So I did courage, temperance, and then I am now talking about discipline. Like right as this book is coming out, I'm having to carve out my days to write the next one. So I could be celebrating, I could be
So this is
resting.
the third. You've already done the first two.
I,
I didn't realize
I've
you got
I've
temperance on.
done the first two,
Got it.
courage, self-discipline, and now I'm starting justice, which is the third.
I got it.
And then
Okay. So
wisdom will be the fourth.
temperance and discipline are the second. And what's the fourth going to be? Wisdom. That's right.
Wisdom, justice,
That's right.
wisdom.
Wisdom. It's fascinating because I could see the challenge in writing these, because all these virtues, these cardinal virtues kind of overlap, or,
Yes.
the edges of them overlap, right? So this story about Lincoln could fit in all four of them. There's courage, there's discipline, there's wisdom, right?
I think that's the
It's
idea. Yeah.
wonderful.
And none of the virtues work particularly well in isolation, right? So
Right,
courage in pursuit of the wrong cause, an unjust cause, is not is not a virtue, right? And then how
right,
do you know what the right cause is? Well, now you
right.
need wisdom. And then how do you know how much courage, right? Or what the
It's neat.
now you have self-discipline. So
Discipline.
yes,
Right.
they're all in a tension and a balance with each other. Um but
Yeah,
justice
it
is the
would
one
make a
I'm most
great training
intimidated
program. I think there's a business here,
by.
Ryan. Maybe we should partner on
We should.
that. Awesome, man. It's been so great talking to you.
As
I
always,
always
man.
love these conversations. Um, of course, everyone knows where to find you, Ryan Holiday. For this particular book, Discipline Equals Destiny, anything to say on that? Do you have any pre-launch? When's it come out? Or is
So
it?
it'll come out September 27th
Okay, good.
everywhere. And yeah,
Got
we
some
have a
time.
bunch of pre-order stuff at dailystoic.com/pre-order. You can get signed copies. I'm even doing like pages that I cut out of the manuscript that I've signed, like all the
Nice.
pages that I
You
wrote while
got that
editing.
one from Steven, didn't you?
I did. Well,
Fresco.
actually, I gave Steven the idea. He was like, "Hey,"
Did you?
he's like, I have he's what he said to me was, I have the original typewritten, like from a typewriter draft
Yeah.
of Gates of Fire. He's like, what do you think
I've
I
got
should
a
do with it?
couple of those pages.
Yeah.
I did the pre-order and I was like, I got to get one of those signed.
Well,
It's awesome. Great
you know
idea.
what you should do? You should give away a page to everyone who pre-orders the book. And he said, I was like, he said, I'll do that. And I said, but since this was my idea, you have to give me the last page of Gates of Fire, which he did. And it's hanging on the other side of the wall right here. And then I promptly took the idea myself because I think it's really cool.
That is really cool.
What pages did you get?
I don't, I think it's where Leonidas says, come back, or no, the wife says, come back with your sword or on it, I think.
Oh, with your shield or on it.
With your shield or on it.
Fuck, that's a good page. Oh man, I should ask for that one. The page I got from Steven is the last page where he has the epitaph of the Spartan monument at Thermopylae that says, tell the strangers passing by that here obedient to their laws we lie." The sort of that they gave themselves for duty in this heroic sacrifice. Or no, tell Sparta, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie. I got goosebumps even just saying it. It's to me one of the
That's
most
awesome.
beautiful epitaphs in all of human history.
I mean, that story that Steve made come alive with Gates of Fire has inspired so many warriors. And to this day, like I took a group of warriors and vets who were struggling with post-traumatic stress over to Sparta, and we hiked from Sparta to Thermopylae.
Wow.
And would never have done that were it not for Gates of Fire and Pressfield, kind of bringing that to life for us.
Oh man, that
Isn't
must have been incredible.
It was a cool experience. Yeah. Ryan, thanks so much.
Thanks for
I'll
having
let you go here. It's been an honor, and you rock.
As
and
always.
We'll let you know when this goes live and all that kind of stuff.
Sweet.
Yeah, let me know if I can support you any other way.
You're the best.
Yeah.
Cool,
all right,
man.
buddy. You take care now. Thanks so much.